All right, yeah, recording has started now. You can get
Uh,
started.
okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes, I can
All
see and share your screen as well. Thank you so much.
right, great. Thanks, Mandeep. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to what has been looks like a great long day for everybody. I guess the second to the last session here today, as before you get to the final quiz and closing notes. So I want to thank the organizers of the India Cloud Security Summit, as well as all of the sponsors here on the screen for helping to put on this great event. I believe this is my second or third year being involved in it, so I want to really reach out my appreciation for having me be involved and having me provide a session. So let's move into it so that we can get through all of the content here. Um, got the great, exciting prizes. Again, thanks to the sponsors. Um, and just to introduce my session, my name's Dwayne Natwick. I am a CEO, owner of my own company, Captain Hyperscaler, that delivers cloud and security training and consulting to companies. I also previously was a global cloud security lead for a Microsoft and multi-cloud GSI. Up until a couple months ago, I decided to go out on my own and do consulting and freelance training. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Azure and security, and a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program as well. So feel free to reach out to me on social media. Happy to answer all your questions. But what I'm here today to talk to you about is architecting zero trust framework in Azure, some best practices around that. I know I caught some of Mohit's presentation, and I heard him talking about zero trust and around Kubernetes. Interesting uh, little background in terms of what he was talking about around Bitcoin. I worked for a learning partner, and we had an on-demand platform where we would offer like a free 7-day trial, and there was lab content on there for the courses, and especially for like the AZ 104 course or the AZ 204 course, people would go on that course, and if we didn't have our policies locked down enough, or if something was changed in how the configuration of resources were within Azure. Somebody would go in, build very large virtual machines and start Bitcoin mining on our labs. So I have firsthand knowledge of what Mohit was talking about around the Bitcoin mining and how people will try and find ways into other people's subscriptions to do that Bitcoin mining. So another reason for zero trust architecture, which we're going to talk about now. So we're going to go through quite a bit, but it looks like a lot, but we will be able to definitely cover it within the time frame of this session. We're going to talk about what is zero trust. We're going to talk about path to cloud adoption. We'll cover that quickly because I know there were a lot of different path to cloud sessions that you probably already attended today, and to decrease redundancy. Planning your readiness, understanding your cloud maturity, which is very important to getting to the point of cloud adoption and of building your architecture, analyzing risk and risk tolerance, and once you've analyzed your risk tolerance, why do we want to architect a zero trust? What are those 6 pillars, and how do we apply that zero trust methodology within our overall architecture? So let's jump in right away here. So what is zero trust? So many of you, zero trust has become a very popular term out there when talking about cloud and technologies within the cloud. So we want to look at and we want to know, okay, what is zero trust? How are we handling zero trust? And this, a lot of times this gets lumped into access to resources, but it's also just really a framework for protection. And one of the things that I really say it is when talking about zero trust is it is a what I see it as is an evolution of defense in depth. It is defense in depth 2.0, and when we go through when we talk about the pillars later on in this presentation, you'll see why. But there's three key components to zero trust: verify explicitly, maintaining the principles of least privilege, which is just in time as well as just enough access, and then assuming a breach, assuming that your identities or your infrastructure, your perimeter, uh, assume the worst, and then you will be able to protect it the best. Really, is what it comes down to. If you are just saying, "Oh, I've got the right controls in place. I understand everything about about my infrastructure," you get arrogant about it, that's when you're going to have a breach. So if you assume the worst and protect with the best, then you are going to be in much better shape than if you just sit there, say, okay, I've got firewall in place, I know what's going on, and I will be just fine. We need to make sure that we're monitoring properly. We understand that the cloud environment continuously changes, so we need to make sure that we are thinking that way and thinking that something bad is going to happen at all times as security people. So that being said, the hyperscalers have provided us with a lot of guidelines, and Microsoft really has, one of the best and most defined cloud adoption frameworks, with all of the upfront planning and strategy and readiness that goes into the cloud adoption, and then with the security and management and governance all intertwined at the as we go through, so that we make sure that we are adopting and migrating to the cloud with security in mind. AWS and GCP have a cloud adoption framework as well. They all align to a well-architected framework, so keep those in mind. But Microsoft, with their defining their strategy, their planning, and I always tell anybody in any discussion or class that I'm in is, if you don't plan, you're going to fail. There is a cliche or adage that is, if you fail to plan, you're going to plan to fail. So I always say you need to put your due diligence and your due care up front in how you are going to have your strategy. Why are you migrating to the cloud? What are your drivers for it? What is your plan, and what is your aspect and how are you ready? What is your readiness? And really, when you get to this readiness, this is really when you really want to know, what is my risk? What is my risk to moving to the cloud, and how do I mitigate that risk the best as possible, or how do I respond to that risk from a zero trust perspective? Again, so taking that a step further into that readiness, we want to make sure we have a clear vision. When we're migrating to the cloud, cost savings is not a driver to the cloud, or at least not a primary driver. You may have some cost savings that may be a direction you might want to take, but we need to align to a business and a technology mission. I teach ISC2 classes, and one of the classes I was teaching this week was the governance, risk, and compliance, which is around risk management framework, and really is around building putting new systems online, new applications online, and in a secure manner that is within the organizational's risk tolerance. And that really is what we're doing here. We're looking at organizational risk, and we're looking at technology risk, and we're making sure that they're aligned together as part of our plan to moving forward into the cloud. And within that, we're building in our zero trust methodology as part of that manner in which to decrease the risk to our organization. Um, Look at what your maturity level is. What is our risk? Knowing your risk management strategy is going to help within the architecting of that zero trust, understanding where your risks are, and from where your risks are and what they are, both organizationally and from a technological perspective. What risks will we tolerate? And how are we going to handle our risks? Knowing that we never ignore a risk, we need to make sure that we are acknowledging every risk within our organizations and within our systems. Back to the Kubernetes talk before this, have understanding from a networking perspective as well as a container image perspective. What are our risks of somebody putting their own image on our infrastructure and doing Bitcoin mining? How are we going to handle that if that takes place? And what is the potential risk? What's the a financial risk to that? What is the reputational risk? What are all those risks that are going to take place, and how are we going to handle them? Are we going to accept them? Are we going to avoid them? Are we going to transfer them, or are we going to mitigate them? For example, if we are migrating to Microsoft Azure, there's a certain level of risk that we are transferring or sharing with Microsoft, and that is the physical. Microsoft is taking over that physical risk of somebody breaching the building and doing something to our actual physical devices, that we are going to address and we're going to have within our risk management strategy. And it all starts at the top. It starts with our mission, with our organization and what our organizational risk strategy is and risk tolerance, how our systems align to that organizational strategy within the mission and the business function and processes, and what that enterprise and how security and privacy fit within the overall enterprise architecture. When we're bringing in a new system, a new application, new Kubernetes cluster, we need to take and understand how that aligns and how that's going to interact with the overall enterprise architecture, as we are developing that and bringing it into an online, into a cloud environment. So why zero trust? We've determined our risk. We know what our risk tolerance is within our organization. Now we need to take it a step forward into our architecture, and what are we doing to do that? So, um, and why would we want to do that? The key here is if we're doing our due diligence and our due care to stay in front of and assuming a breach, and we are addressing that appropriately throughout the pillars of zero trust and the zero trust architecture, we are going to have a more secure and more compliant architecture overall. That is going to include a more compliant architecture. We're going to then decrease our risk, and consequently decrease what levels of residual risk if we put all of the proper controls in place. We're going to add more flexibility and uh, cost savings to our overall architecture, because we are not spending the resources and time to how we are, to doing reactive types of security. If the more proactive we are, the more flexibility we're going to create for our staff, for our resources, as well as within our environment, to do more things and to build more systems, build more applications if we have this methodology in place, which then turns into a higher return on our investment. I do another talk around the return on investment to utilizing Microsoft Cloud, especially Microsoft 365. All of the tools and everything that are in place within Microsoft 365 E5 for securing identities with Entra ID, with their top premium level, with doing behavioral analysis through Entra ID, identity protection, and password protection capabilities, conditional, using, uh, you know, conditional access policies for understanding real-time risk for users and sign-in risk is going to brings a very high return on investment. Using Azure firewalls for protecting the perimeter with built-in IDS and IPS capabilities, which is intrusion detection, intrusion prevention capabilities, are all part of that. Assuming a breach, network security groups are a free way to put rules on your subnets to block certain traffic from certain IP addresses that we've found as malicious, or only allowing certain traffic from certain IP addresses that are known safe locations. All of those things bring a higher return on investment because we're safe. We're not investing in a whole bunch of one-off controls from third parties. We're utilizing native tools that we have within Microsoft Azure, as well as ones that come along with Microsoft 365 E5. And Microsoft's even doing things to take that a step further with the new Defender XDR capabilities, and starting to bring a lot of that and Microsoft Purview into Azure, and allowing you to use those licenses for Azure storage and Azure SQL databases and things like that, to protect and to govern over your data and protect your data and your infrastructure. So when we're architecting for zero trust, the key aspects here are there's 6 pillars, and like I said, I've mentioned that I tend to call the zero trust methodology defense in depth 2.0, because it is an evolution to defense in depth. If we were using a defense in depth strategy, defense in depth methodology, we would be in a very good place to start to move to zero trust. It's just taking that defense in depth to the point of not only are we putting defenses and controls in place in different areas of our infrastructure, but we are also taking those, and we are applying that assume a breach principle of least privilege, and verify explicitly aspects of zero trust across all of our pillars of defense in depth to build a zero trust methodology. And that's really what we're doing here. And you can see, these are very similar. They're in a different order, but if we took it from a defense in depth approach, we have defense in depth. We have the physical aspect, which is risk that is assumed by Microsoft in Azure and Microsoft 365, excuse me. We have our identity and access, which is, identity is the new perimeter, as we like to say, or identity is the new control plane as we move to the cloud. If we move infrastructure over where devices are, that becomes the next. Then network, because infrastructure, and think of that in terms of our network, our perimeter. Then we have our network, our internal network, and then if we move devices and slid apps over, that's our devices, our endpoints, protecting all of our endpoints, making sure ports are closed and things like that. Then our apps and APIs, and then our data. We're looking at it from a defense in depth perspective right off the bat when we're thinking about zero trust. So that's I think of it as a nice little term that everybody can think of, and it gives everybody a little bit of pause by saying zero trust. And what we're doing by verifying explicitly before we allow anything to traverse across our network. So let's break down each of those a little bit and talk more about each of these pillars as we move through this discussion. Identity is the new perimeter, right? If we're migrating to the cloud, we're transferring the risk of the physical to Microsoft from an Azure perspective as well as Microsoft 365 perspective. If we're doing it from, if we're doing it with Microsoft 365, obviously we're transferring a little bit more than just and sharing a little bit more than just the physical aspect of things. When we're talking about application protection and things like that, there's a shared transfer of risk within those areas as well. But let's think of it just from an Azure perspective, just to avoid confusion. We are looking at the identity, and really the foundation of cloud access is our identity. It's Entra ID. It's hybrid identities. It's having our user names and passwords all over the internet, and trying to avoid exposure and avoid issues with how we are accessing our data within Azure. So what we need to think about and what we need to make sure we are controlling is how we are maintaining our integrity through zero trust principles, and how we are also maintaining that level of just in time and just enough access within the principles of least privilege. So we want to make access based on conditions, as well as first and foremost multi-factor authentication, having some form of multi-factor authentication and strong multi-factor authentication in place that is resilient to, that verification is resilient to some level to social engineering is extremely important. And then also providing access based on conditions using Microsoft Entra ID conditional access policies become very clear and very important to this entire aspect of things. And so when we are thinking about conditional access policies, which I don't have a slide on conditional access policies, but those of you that aren't familiar with how a conditional access policy works, you can make a decision and trigger a conditional access policies based on where someone is from a location perspective, what network they're on, whether that network has been identified as a malicious IP address, whether that the device that you're accessing from has Intune on it, so it's marked as compliant, it's fully patched, what the user's risk as well as the sign-in risk. Has the user been compromised? Have their credentials potentially been stolen? And then we can, and then as well as the application that is being accessed can all be verified, and we can allow or block based on those conditions, or we can make sure somebody's verifying again, and that's that part of that verify explicitly aspect of things. If they've moved, you can verify somebody with multi-factor authentication when they start work in the morning at their home office or corporate office, and they use their multi-factor authentication. They use their Windows Hello facial recognition to get online, and then they are looking from there to they've verified who they are. We've made sure we've done our due diligence from that perspective. Then they move to somewhere else. They move to to Starbucks, and they're on a public Wi-Fi. We are going to make sure, based on the fact that they've made a location change, we're going to make them verify who they are again. And if they're accessing our line of business application or our HR application, we may block access to that application because there is sensitive data on that application that we do not want to expose across a public wireless network. And those are all parts of how we can use identity to lock and block uh, our potential exposure and our potential vulnerability to a within a public network, which then gets us to infrastructure and permission, proper permissions to resources. Again, at properly defining and designing administrative roles and privileges, and providing time-bound access to resources. Many of you may, from a network perimeter standpoint, making sure we are not allowing public traffic to access our private resources, things like that, and making time-bound access to those resources through our, again, conditional access policies, as well as our privileged identity management can help, and not giving everybody administrative roles and privileges help to protect that infrastructure. We're not going to give Alice our uh, administrative rights to add users to Microsoft 365 at all times, or to access a Azure virtual machine when their daily job is not to do all of those, do those things, on a constant basis. We are going to give Alice that privilege access when they need it, for the amount of time that they need it, and then we will turn it off until Alice needs it again. That is a way to protect our infrastructure. Another good practice here is to make sure that a user, that maybe a good practice is even have administrative users be different, have the user ID that Alice is using for administrative access be different than the one that Alice uses for their day-to-day, for their, from their user perspective as well. Networking, public and private network isolation. As I was saying, don't let public resources traverse over private networks. If somebody's coming in on our, through our website, don't allow, management backdoors into our resources. Segment those networks. Provide as well, physical as well as virtual isolation. Physical isolation from an Azure perspective would be, have those networks be two different segments, two different VNets that aren't peering to each other as much as possible. Then virtual isolation through virtual LANs and virtual connections, especially through a from a perspective of sorry, through a perspective of how they're connecting, from corporate offices. Use proper virtual connections, use express routes and things like that. Again, access control lists. Network security groups, I mentioned, is a good free security tool within Microsoft Azure to put rules in place that block network traffic to our subnets, as well as our virtual network cards. Again, and then access policies, having our policies in place. Again, it all refers back to, identity as a new perimeter, having proper access from resource to resource, and service principles that are secure. And if there are elevated administrative privilege type access policies, access that we need to put from resource to resource, that again, that is part of our network segmentation. Devices. I mentioned this before when we were talking about conditional access. We were mentioning, having Microsoft Intune in place for mobile device and mobile application management. Making sure that those personal devices, whether it's a laptop or a smartphone, is all being managed by the organization to make sure we have proper file integrity protection, have proper data loss prevention, and harden those devices for decreasing the attack surface, and monitoring all of that within our resources as well. Um, Mobile device, for those of you that, just real quick, if you're not familiar with mobile device management and application management, mobile device management is going to manage that entire device, um, and put policies in place on how that device is used. Where mobile application management can compartmentalize the organization's applications and govern over that. Usually, if the organization is providing the devices, they're going to use MDM. If it is a bring your own device kind of aspect, MAM is considered from users to be less intrusive. From an application perspective, we want to protect against shadow IT. We want to have some sort of cloud access security broker in place, like Microsoft Defender for cloud apps, to discover what apps users are accessing. It's important for maintaining compliance within our organization to do that, as well as as well as the web application firewall aspect of uh, and protecting public websites from common attacks. I mentioned the OWASP protection here. OWASP is a community organization essentially that puts together these top 10 attacks, on a somewhat annual basis. That gives you some guidance and guidelines on how to protect your applications and what types of attacks are popular out there. And finally, at the back end of everything, and really at the core of it all, as we're going through each layer of a zero trust architecture and methodology, we need to protect our data and protect against privacy of data, and avoid and compliance to standards like GDPR. We need to know where our data is and we need to govern over it. We need to classify all of our data, make sure that we are utilizing DLP and sensitivity labels, and tagging that information so that we aren't oversharing and we're not sharing sensitive and classified information. Those are all key aspects to putting zero trust within your architecture as well. And again, a lot of those tools are available through Microsoft 365 E5 and Microsoft Purview to protect that data across your Microsoft and your multi-cloud and your hybrid architecture. Through Purview, and that ties into Azure, into AWS, AWS S3 buckets, into databases, and into what you have maybe connected into your cloud environments with Azure Arc. Just a real quick scenario here to think about. You have, and I've kind of brought these methodologies in where you have a company that has Azure, has on-premises, has various SaaS applications within the architecture, including Microsoft 365, and they've come to you as a consultant for assistance in building their architecture. How do we take that and bring that into a zero trust methodology? As I've given throughout different tools that we have within Microsoft 365, within Microsoft Purview, within Azure, we can build that defense in depth strategy for an organization at all of those pillars. You need to consider every one of those pillars and have proper defenses in place, have proper governance in place for monitoring and managing things like shadow IT. Make sure that we aren't bringing in bringing in applications that are going to decrease our level of protection as well. Those are all things we need to consider. So, call to action. Are you ready? Do you have, what are we going to do? You need to have a clear and defined plan and know your organizational goals. Have a clear risk management strategy and understand the organizational risk tolerance. What level of tolerance do they have? Do we have, and what's the budget for that? The strategy, mission, and system, the mission, and the system strategy for adoption and security are all things that you need to make sure you are putting and have aligned from the business mission and processes, and have a strategy for continuous monitoring. If we're not monitoring what is taking place within our network. From a from any perspective, we are not doing our due diligence and our due care for zero trust. So focus at the beginning. Make sure you're defining your strategy. Make sure you are putting a proper plan in place and understanding again the risk tolerance and align it to from an organizational risk tolerance level and aligning it to the technical goals across all of those pillars of zero trust. And then that will help to bring you to a potential successful cloud migration and really a zero trust architecture that the organization will be happy with. So just to sum up, as we close out our time, we discussed, and hopefully everybody gained a little bit more insight into what is zero trust, why we want to think about zero trust and what the benefits are to us as an organization. And then securing those 6 pillars: identity, networking, infrastructure, the applications, devices, and data, and looking at that from a holistic level as well as a compartmentalized defense in depth aspect is all going to make sure your architecture is sound and that you have a strategy for continuously monitoring those controls as you complete the aspect into complete your transformation into the cloud. And feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. Like I said, any questions that you may have, I can hang on as well as the next session starts for a few minutes while if you have any questions, you can ask those questions and I'll respond to them as the new session starts. And we will go from thanks everybody, and thanks all of the sponsors again for having me again this year. Hope to be back again next year. But I really appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your conference, rest of your day. Good luck on the quiz and getting any good prizes and swag. So good luck to everybody there, and enjoy your next presenter, which I believe is Hans Lagler-Gruner. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome to Hans, and with a great session coming up in a couple minutes around Microsoft Sentinel.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Devin, for the session.
Thank you, Mandeep. Appreciate it.
Yep. I'm going to stop the recording.